I'm confident that in 2021, 2022, we'll see more of these companies entering the IoT industry, bringing a massive needed capability. Yeah.
Hello and welcome. My name is Robert Schmidt. I'm Deloitte's Chief IoT Technologist, also known as Mr. IoT. Welcome to another coffee chat. My guest today is Wienke Giezeman, and he's the CEO and co-founder of the Things Network. Welcome to the show, Wienke, and how are you doing?
Very good, very good. Thanks for having me, Robert. It's great to have this coffee chat.
That's awesome. We actually were together on a panel just the other week, and I just thought, hey, I gotta have Wienke on one of my coffee chats and learn more about not just about the Things Network. I want to hear about Europe some. You're in Europe. I don't know. I'm always fascinated by what's going on in IoT, particularly in other areas that, if you know, I'm Austrian originally, and so you're kind of closer to my original home. So tell us a little bit about the Things Network. Tell us about you. I'd love to learn more.
Great, yeah. So I'm Wienke Giezeman, CEO and co-founder of the Things Network and the Things Industries. And what we do is we're in the Internet of Things, and specifically in low power wide area networks. And within that, we specialized in something called LoRaWAN. And this is basically a simple technology that allows you to connect sensors that can last on a battery for very long. That's why it's called low power wide area networks. And we have built the Things Network based on the LoRaWAN protocol, which allows you to build networks with this radio frequency technology. And we did that by building a distributed and collaborative network, and by building a developer ecosystem first. So Internet of Things market is still immature in many places, and it's really hard to build end-to-end applications. 9 out of 10 IoT projects fail. So our goal was not so much to push the technology, but also push the competence and push the knowledge for our customers to be successful in IoT. And that's why we built the Things Network. And we have and that's an open source organizations where we push that. And we have a company called the Things Industries, where we help enterprises and corporates all around the world to build their IoT solutions using low power wide area network technology.
So I love this idea that you really are a proponent of, which is I want to help developers. I want to help developers get better at this. And so you've done some amazing things around this. Tell us a little bit about some of the projects that I know talking to someone about their favorite child is kind of a difficult thing, but if you had to pick a couple really examples of projects that have been successful, what were they? Give us some examples. I love talking about those.
Yeah, so one of the examples that I always give of LoRaWAN is the smart mousetrap, which is a mousetrap that's connected, and it will give a signal to the ERP of the facility management company that the rodent has been caught. So the bottom line operational expenses business there is massive, because now all of a sudden you don't have to employ so many people to check the mousetraps. You only have to send them to the mousetrap that actually have caught the rodent. So that is, I think, from a business perspective, is something very very cool. If you look at more, this is like a very typical bottom line OPEX saving. Talking about increasing the top line, we see that, for instance, a customer of ours, WeWork, they have meeting spaces in their co-working spaces, and they're checking how they're actually being used. And we all know that the actually booking doesn't reflect people actually being there and having a meeting. And what they see is that once they see that, for instance, in some sites or some locations they're actually the meeting rooms are not used that much, then moving a square the real estate from meeting room to desk space is directly moving into a revenue generating category of So that's a very interesting use case. In agriculture, we're very active. We have a customer that tracks more than 10,000 cows in Australia and New Zealand through air tags that can be charged by the sun, allowing them to have, let's say, these fenceless farms, which they have in these countries. In logistics, we're helping the largest ship management company in the world, Williamson, and they operate ships, and we help them with predictive maintenance use case and building these IoT networks on these large ships that transport cars and aircraft parts, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's really cool to see that we're selling we're selling technology, but all our customers are building all these very cool business cases on top of that.
Where you have a lot of children that you really like. It's great to see how you have examples in these different areas. Help me. So, two questions. Number one, you talked about the space utilization, and I'm curious with how that's changed through the pandemic. Have you seen any changes in that and any new benefits out of that? That's number one. And number two, while you talk about this, give us a little bit of an idea. I mean, if I think of a building, every building has Wi-Fi, and why use LoRa versus a Wi-Fi based sensor when you have power and you have Wi-Fi around? There's some obvious advantages that I'd love to have you talk about a little bit and see what you found around that.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you look around what the COVID situation did to the smart building, let's say industry, or which is of course just coming up, as that you've seen that there's more focus on desk space utilization, but also air quality, and with regards to ventilation and you see some experiments and use cases around that. And so definitely that have been impacted. And if you look at the smart building, let's say if you would see that as an ecosystem, there's a lot of you want to know. And like, for instance, companies like Microsoft, they try to grasp that with a concept called the digital twin, and see like, what can I build that digital twin of that building or a meeting room or of a space or an object. And some data will flow from maybe already existing ERP system. Some data will flow from existing sensors that are wired, but there's a lot of data. For instance, I gave you example of the measuring the occupancy of a meeting room. That is something you have to retrofit. You have to add that to the existing configuration, and you have to do it with sensors that you want to make sure that can act autonomously, and therefore you want to have it on a battery. And therefore, you need a technology that's very power efficient and low power, and and that is where LoRaWAN comes in, because you can place that sensor, walk away, and then only have to come back 3 years later because you then need to replace the battery. So what it does is you can implement something, but it doesn't create a massive, let's say, IT operations load and burden on the operations.
And how about the speed you can implement this? Because one of the things we found, particularly with the pandemic, was, we had to switch quickly, right? And some places didn't have this ability to track how many people were in certain spaces. For example, factories, we needed to get them up again, but we needed to have social distancing happening and so forth. Are there advantages that LoRa brings in that space too?
So one of the biggest challenges in IoT right now is installation, and we try to do that to make sure that you don't have to be, let's say, in working in IT operations to install it. So you can have for instance, the facility management employee do it, or even somebody on site that's already there. But yeah, this is one of the big challenges that is there in the IoT industry, and the IoT industry is as I'm now in it for 5 years. It definitely didn't go to the maturity levels that we would have wanted it to go 5 years ago. Look at all the predictions that are not actually are like we had 5 years ago. We're definitely not there. But what we see now is that, and that's something we're going to announce something along the lines that in our big conference at the end of January, is that where you see that companies diving on that, they have IT ops competences, they have the global infrastructure, and you now more and more see companies that are going into the IoT industry and say, okay, I'm bringing in fast deployment globally with existing workforces that, for instance, already used for battery replacement of laptops, installation of laptops, replacement of printer cartridges, etc. So I'm confident that in 2021, 2022, we'll see more of these companies entering the IoT industry, bringing a massive needed capability. Yeah.
So it's interesting, right? When you talk about 5 years ago, how we predicted and made predictions, I guess I'm guilty of some of those, right? I remember there's a few things I'm probably disappointed about. I think one of the things I'm particularly disappointed about is I feel like we still are in the early infancies of these sensors, these personal sensors we wear, right? They're good. They do tracking of certain things, but they're still not quite the health sensor that I think I'd like them to be. What are some of the things, if you think back, that you thought were going to be big today that aren't? And what do you think is actually stopping it from really getting to the level we thought it would be?
Yeah, so I think there's one thing that's the disappointment in the technological capability, and that's just moving less quick than we thought. And I think after 5 years, we definitely see some killer apps emerging right now that can depend on solid technology. I'm speaking for our LoRaWAN ecosystem, so that's positive. And then that's going bottom up, right? Like that is. And the other one is top down. It's acceptance. It's board level knowledge around it, and they need to grow together. Let's say step by step. And I think once you have these simple, as I mentioned, like these simple bottom line OPEX saving use cases where you basically can't go wrong. That's where you now see the traction. But that's not the big promise. Like the big promise is that we didn't think that narrow-minded and just in bottom line saving. No, it's the complete soup of data that is the value. It's not just. I will always compare it to like a meatball soup. Is you can let's say go for all the ingredients and make a business case out of it, but it's actually the soup that makes it. And sometimes you have to pay a lot for some data, sometimes a little, but the synergy of all the data, that's going to bring us to a higher level. That's what I'm a bit disappointed around. What I would have expected a bit more to come, but you see it more and more. And then I think in your example of these health applications, that's where you see it's like bottom up. You would expect these things to have sensors that would have my sugar levels. Like that's what like that kind of stuff. It's not there yet. On the other hand, you see top down where, in this case, then Apple is aggregating that data in a way that it motivates me, it informs me. That's getting better and better. So it's all getting there, but not at the pace that we wanted it to be at 5 years ago. And the question if that's a bad thing, I think the end user doesn't really care. But yeah.
I have to tell you, I love this analogy of a soup because I never thought of it this way, but to talk about the ingredients versus the full taste of the soup, that's super fascinating. And it's often the question of, what ingredient am I missing to make the soup perfect? So
Yeah,
it's a super
to get to
interesting analogy.
umami, right? So you can, I don't know if you know about cooking, but like this idea of getting into the umami, like getting the umami, is that like if it misses salt, I can have all the perfect ingredients, but if it misses salt, like it doesn't create the umami. But if you add the salt and remove the sugar, yeah.
I was actually more thinking of the expensive ingredients like saffron and a truffle or
Uh,
something like that. But yeah, no, I'm with you. So LoRa versus Bluetooth. Talk a little bit to me about that because we've not seen LoRaWAN to be the big protocol. I think LoRaWAN has been bigger in Europe than it's been in the US. Please tell me if I'm wrong. But in any case, tell me what sort of like where do we go on this? Recommendations for people that are interested in looking at this, because it's always a big question, right? You start a project, particularly an IT project, from the ground up, you got to think of what's the network I use, you got to think of the traffic on the network, and you got to think of latency and so forth. And I've seen a lot of push towards low energy Bluetooth and not as much LoRa, but I know you've really pretty much bet your whole business model on this. So talk to us a little bit about this. Sort of like if I'm a developer, what do I do around that?
Yeah. So what you see is you have these different technology in the market. They all have a different, let's say, use case, and they have different. They also have overlap as well. And it's good that you make the comparison between Bluetooth and LoRa, because way too often the comparison between LoRa and operator technology is done. While basically what you're saying, that makes a lot more sense. So Bluetooth is more for shorter range. It has this low power version, and the advantage there as well is that all smartphones adopt it as well. So, for instance, let's say you build with Bluetooth a tracking system for vaccines, and you do want to measure the temperature. Once it comes in a factory, you want to make sure that all workers have a certain app on their phone and it can offload the data in an encrypted way. So that's an architecture that you can choose. There's a lot of dependencies on that. Like, do I want to do that? Do I want to make sure that it connects to Bluetooth? Like, I install Bluetooth gateways and phones. There's a lot of choices to that. If you then, for instance, would implement the same use case in LoRaWAN, you would be able to utilize some nation networks, if you like. For instance, if you're in France or in Switzerland, and you can use the same sensor to build your own network. And this gives you a lot of choice and flexibility in that sense. But yeah, you have to install dedicated LoRaWAN gateways. Now, luckily, these can get very, very cheap, especially if you talk about these logistics. You always have corridors. You always have places where all the freight goes through. So in logistics, setting up a gateway should not be that hard. And the advantage there is that, you have this long range feature, so you don't have to install a lot of gateways. But the answer that probably everybody would like to hear, and then when I talk to customers, they would say, okay, should I use commodity A, which is Bluetooth, or should I use commodity B? And unfortunately, for a lot of customers, the answer is no. There is a whole design process. You have design process A, or you have design process B. And that's a design process with a world full of pain, because that's what hardware development and this kind of stuff does. And I think that's also always very good to add to this. It's not a red corner flourishes blue corner. It's not a commodity A, commodity B. It's all, most of the time, a very extended design process. So that's always good to take into account that you really know what you're comparing.
So often when I have conversations with network providers, the operators, my push to them is, as it is to many of the larger mobile providers in the sense of the mobile operating system companies, is I don't want to think about this as a developer. You need to make this transparent to me. I just want to connect and you handle the rest. Who in your mind is responsible for that? Who in your mind do we go to, you and I, as evangelists for IoT, and really push them to make this totally transparent, really take this away from us? It's sort of like, I think of it this way, right? Today on my phone, when I am in home, it uses Wi-Fi to make a phone call. When I leave the house, it switches. I kind of hear a click, but it switches to cell. And I don't think about it. when who do I go to make this happen for IoT? That it switches from Bluetooth to Wi-Fi to LoRa to, and then eventually to 5G or whatever way it goes, right? But I don't want to think about this. Who do I go to? Do I go to the Googles and the Apples of the world? Do I go to the big cell providers of the world? Is it all of them together? Where do we go and start?
Yeah. So the answer is
Or
there's
don't
no.
we? Is this sort of like a bad idea altogether? What do you think?
No, I think the dream you're painting is good, but I'm gonna wake you up because it's for IoT that's really a dream, and the whole and so I'm not saying that we should strive for this as technologists, right? So this is something every bit we can make it more interoperable, more standardized, more like, because that's what we need as well as a business, because we thrive on network effects. With any standards deliver these network effects. The reality is that this mobile phone has one use case, and that's to operate this screen, right? So that's the only use case we ended up. And that use case, if you break this one down, most of all these phones in the world, they are existent of the same components, not just as your middle of the road car, right? It has most of the, like all the brands have the same components. So this is a highly, like, economies of scale in the smartphone market are immense, because there's just one use case, there's just one network, in this sense, Wi-Fi and a cellular. So there's two networks, and the core components are mostly, all of them are the same. So this is a highly standardized industry. The apps you run here are virtual. The apps on IoT are physical. So this breaks all these economies of scale. This creates this fragmentation because the real world is fragmented, and this creates these challenges. So this is the challenge. That said, if you look at LoRa for smart building and sites, and also for some operators use it, you see more and more that you have a developer and device ecosystem that's maturing. So 4 years ago, you had literally hundreds of temperature sensors you could use on LoRaWAN. That's converging to a few winners. You had a few movement sensors. You had a few pair sensors. So what you're now seeing is that through this ecosystem approach, you're converging in the LoRa ecosystem. You have these device makers converging to a single use case. So what I literally hope is that it works. Then you also mentioned multi-radio. And this brings such, like, if 9 out of 10 IoT product launches or product developments fail, if you would say a multi-radio, that's even a more high percentage, right? It's adding so much complexity. So the painter you're picturing, painter you are, the picture you're painting, yes, that's what we should strive, but we're not there yet.
I'm a little sad now because
Yeah.
what you just made me realize my dream might be further out than I was hoping. But it sounds
No,
like
so
that.
I think we're getting there, but and specifically if you come with some skill, and I think the data, what we're showing is we do not only have large customers with a huge amount, like with almost 100,000 sensors on a single deployment, but also we have a lot of customers that just have 1,000. So that is already data that the long tail is able to take care of itself, that the standardization is helping these, like, also niche use cases work. So we're getting there, but yeah, I also want to make sure that people that listen, that they get a realistic picture and not have the IoT show pony story. Yeah.
So, Mika, you have your own podcast. What's coming up there? What are the sort of highlights from there? Anything in particular you want to tell us about?
So no, so we do a lot of knowledge publishing. So we have podcasts, but we also, there's a big conference coming up. Usually we have a physical conference where 1,500 people around the world on average gather in Amsterdam for two days, and we now have it virtual online. We worked hard to get all the knowledge in. It's including certification and all kinds of other stuff. So if you are a product manager or want to get a pressure cooker in that, then we have all the content consumed there. And that's really into this niche, making that focused on LoRaWAN. When I do this podcast and panels, and I think the general feeling there is that in the industry is that you have these pockets of inertia, and if you look at our business, we saw growth in smart building, food compliance use cases, and what you see is that after 5 years, there's these silos, or let's say what we call technology stacks, that are reaching this level of maturity that enterprises feel confident to scale on that. And that's just what you see. You see these pockets of inertia, like these killer app-like of patterns. So, and that's what we're seeing across the board. Also, when I talk to friends that work at Ericsson or in the cellular world or in the, it's getting there, and it's gonna be not as big as Gartner promised, with the billions of devices and the huge amount of opportunities. But yeah, one step at a time, getting there.
Okay, anything that we didn't talk about that we should talk about? I really acknowledge and I really appreciate what you do in terms of pushing use cases, being realistic, helping develop us. Thank you for doing that. It really makes a difference. Anything we haven't talked about that you want to make sure we get in?
No.
Where do people go to find you?
Yeah, so if you want to attend the conference, go to the thinksnetwork.org. If you want to learn more on how we help billion-dollar companies with their IoT strategy, then you go to thethingsindustries.com, and that's our strategy, where we on one hand help the company and the market become more standardized, become more capable. On the other hand, we have services that you can utilize to get even further.
Okay, thank you for being on the show. With this, another coffee chat has come to an end. Thank you for watching. If you missed any of today's show or any previous shows, please check out our playlist or podcast. And with that, I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Have a good one. Bye.